mass bottleneck. Just to give you a heads up, I also have a little time bottleneck. I know that we're a little bit behind schedule, and I have a taxi waiting for me at 1900 hours here European time. So I don't want to be rude, but I really need to jump out exactly when we finish. So without further ado, I think I will start. Looking at some of the key drivers in Europe for battery recycling. I think many of those are familiar, regardless of where in the world you are located. There's, of course, a reason to engage in battery recycling to strengthen your strategic autonomy and diversify your supply chains. You have a lot of customer acceptance issues related to it, and I think we touched upon some of them already in the panel as well. What will happen to, I mean, the entire, at least narrative in Europe that we have shaped by going forward was that we build this battery industry and create really a circular and closed loop value chain. Let's see how this is going to be affected when there's also new chemistries with less valuable materials entering into the market, and the incentives for recycling changing drastically then. Overall, it is also expected that the lower costs that are related to more efficient recycling processes that we see coming online will create greater affordability when it comes to material costs. That in terms, of course, will make EVs more accessible to a broader consumer base, something that, especially in Europe, we are still looking to come to fruition with more affordable EVs entering in the markets. We have the entire dimension on job creation and driving innovation related to recycling as well. I think that it is very good to remember that it supports economic growth as well as creating new job opportunities in the transition to electrification. But as I already alluded to in the title, I think one of the main drivers in Europe that really has spurred this entire recycling business going forward is related to a strong regulatory framework. First and foremost, we have, of course, the batteries regulation that has been adopted in 2023. Replacing the previous battery directive, and it's now applicable for all European member states, and it sets strict requirement on sustainability, recycling, and circular economy requirements for all battery types. And we're going to look a little bit more detail on it because it is adopted, as I said, but there's a lot of the requirements are stipulated in so-called secondary legislation, and a lot of the methodology on how to calculate a lot of those sustainability and recycling measures and requirements is still, so to say, under development. And as always, when it comes to legal text, the devil is in the detail. Then we have the EU Waste Framework Directive that establishes general waste management principles, including battery recycling obligations. The restriction of hazardous substances or RoHS directive that limits the use of harmful substances in batteries to improve recyclability. And this is certainly something that I still think that we need to work on a lot. Going forward, I think in the market we see much more design for cost rather than design for recycling. And then we also have the end-of-life vehicles directive that includes provisions for battery recycling from electric vehicles, as well as the EU Critical Raw Materials Act that stipulates a 25 domestic recycling target. And starting out with the battery regulation, I think this was really a milestone for promoting the creation of a circular battery industry in Europe, and it's a lot of focus around bringing those materials back into the economy. They had tried stricter targets for recycling efficiency and material recovery, and especially recycling efficiency and recycling content is something that are some of those secondary legislation files that are currently strongly debated within the industry on how to design them, that it really stimulates also the use of domestic recycled material and not simply the use of recycled material regardless of its origin. So this is really the foundation. Here are some of the targets set out on the recycling targets. It's a collection of batteries. Then we have the recovery targets for cobalt, nickel, and lithium. The recycled content targets coming into force by 2031, but also the implementation of due diligence affecting the battery value chain. We already heard some comments on battery passport, traceability, and so on and so forth. This chapter dealing with due diligence has now been actually postponed. This is also related to other ongoing simplification exercises within the Commission. So 2 years delay for the due diligence part of the battery regulation is now announced, and we will see if in those timeframes we also can achieve better alignment with other horizontal due diligence reporting requirements in Europe. Then the European Critical Raw Materials Act with the EU recycling target. That is at least, it is still an old picture. I'm so sorry. It should be reading 25, not 15% recycled target. But regardless of that, it emphasizes really the importance of recycling when it comes to sustainability, resource efficiency, economic opportunities, and circular economy. And this is also only possible to achieve if material really stays within Europe. Then there was a very important publication for the framing of the policy landscape in Europe, and that is the so-called Draghi report that took a very, I would say, pragmatic view and what are things are working in Europe and what is maybe not, has areas of improvement to really boost the competitiveness of Europe as such. And even in this regard, I think there was some key takeaways that recognizes the ongoing efforts to recycle EV batteries. They fall short of projected demand, with significant scrap and waste materials continue to be exported to China. It also indicated that secondary production had minimal impact on the supply of critical minerals for clean technologies, and suggests that recycling copper, lithium, nickel, and cobalt from waste batteries could reduce primary supply needs for these minerals by at least 10%. So some recognition, at least, that we should have this material in Europe. So the overall picture is that you have like a quite robust and overarching regulatory framework that is supporting recycling in Europe. So this already looks, the landscape looks quite promising, and I think it has in all of this developments of this legislative acts really shaped the industry. I think that at least from a European perspective, the circularity aspect, bringing materials back to the market, traceable supply chains has already been kind of inherited in the backbone of the industry, which is a good thing. So now to the topic itself, and that is the black mass. So starting with some fundamentals on the recycling process. What we're having is, of course, a feedstock that comes to the recycler. There is a pre-treatment, mechanical treatment, pre-treatment in many cases, where the battery is shredded, and we get a material that is, well, called black mass or BM in the presentation. And following this mechanical pretreatment, we have then a post-treatment with various technologies that I won't touch or go into too much details. And of course, then at the end, you are able to gather either the more valuable materials. Right now, the nickel and cobalt are the cost drivers. Then you have also others. And graphite, manganese, you're still under development to actually capture those materials. Also a short reminder, I think that is maybe a little bit too technical, but nevertheless, this had been part of our white paper on black mass. It's really a definition as what are we talking about. Black mass contains anode and cathode materials, current collector particles, traces of solvents, electrolytes, and organic compounds. So it's despite the rather I would say unified appearance, a complex product with various chemical compositions. Some of the key components that are found in all black mass is, of course, lithium, aluminum from the cathode's current collector, and then additional metals vary based on battery type. And this is the material that we currently see leaving Europe. There have been numbers mentioned, up to 90% currently is actually leaving the European industry. There's an overview on current projects going on in Europe that has been published by a site called batterynews.de. But if you really start to look at this picture, that gives you quite a positive impression. And there's a lot of things happening, but if you really look at the detail, you start to recognize that a lot of those activities really only encompasses the first mechanical pretreatment state. And that is simply, it's of many reasons. Two of them are low capex, so the entrance hurdle to enter this market is quite low. It's also a quite, so to say, easy process with limited technology hurdles. So there are many players that develop smaller factories up to 10,000 tons of black mass capacity for battery recycling. Whereas when it comes to the post-treatment capacity of black mass, this is a complete different picture. Here you have high capex investment needs, you have the need for high technology competence, and economies of scale is very important for those projects actually to get an attractive cost position. And if you're starting to look here at the European landscape, there are really not many projects that are targeting this sector. You have Ascent that has been one of our key panelists today. There's Oranor together with a French player, and some other projects, BSF, Umicore, that are currently kind of in the starting positions, but waiting for the right incentives to actually start working. And this is a little bit depicted in this overview of the European landscape, and this hurdle of material leakage is really having also effects on the upstream part of the value chain. Because if there is no black mass refined in Europe, there's also very little material for the PCAM and CAM manufacturing in Europe available. So it's two sides of the same coin, both upstream and downstream, that is currently struggling. So despite the expected growth curve that we see in recycled material, which is a good market outlook, we have identified a number of uncertainties that are hindering investments in Europe today. That can be summarized in that we have, of course, an impact on the lower expected recycling volumes in the market, where we have a lot of external factors in delays or lagging EV adoption. but also a high share of imported EVs, which means a lot of EVs and batteries are manufactured outside of Europe, which means less production rates for Europe. And also, apologies, extended battery lifetimes, meaning that a lot of the expected feedstock is actually still out on the market in the form of EVs driving around. The biggest hurdle right now, I think, is related to competition from non-EU recycling capacities, where we see that a lot of state-aided recycling facilities in Asia have created significant overcapacities. They're able to pay more. They're also opening up their market, like China, really trying to avoid idle recycling factories in China. They can afford to pay higher prices than EU recyclers can offer driving exports outside of Europe. Then maybe the US IRA, it's a little bit in the balance right now, so we don't need to go into that. But then the remaining part on the regulatory uncertainty that is delaying investments decisions. Here we have the recycling efficiency and recovery of raw material of materials, where unclear calculation methods will impact compliance with recycling standards, of course. So you first need to have the methodology to actually be certain that you are compliant with upcoming laws and standards. That is difficult for the industry to preempt. There's also, I still think, the question on the carbon footprint methodology that is hampering some investment decisions of the battery industry at large in Europe. The end-of-waste criteria, where different interpretations across member states lead to regulatory inconsistencies that in turns will lead to raw material exports. And waste shipment regulation, where the concept of equivalent conditions for non-EU recycling remains still quite vague, making enforcement difficulty. So in our white paper on black mass, we have tried to address a couple of those issues, really looking at the battery regulation and its delegated acts, the EU list of waste and the waste shipment regulation, and trying to see what can really be improved to take a step forward, and also come with some future regulatory framework suggestions that are not on the paper yet. So on the recycling efficiency and recovery of materials obligations, the draft delegated act on the calculation states that black material is an intermediate of the battery recycling, which is positive because it makes black mass export more difficult because it requires verification of equivalent recycling conditions. The weaknesses is that there are right now no requirements for attestation from destination countries in the reporting template, and also no clear guidelines for exporting member states to verify those claims. The Commission is empowered to set detailed rules on equivalent condition, but there is no time frame for implementation currently. So Recharge suggests to require that a formal declaration from the destination country confirming batteries were recycled under equivalent conditions needs to be established. And member states verifying those claims should only accept reports from exporters acting as first recyclers if they submit attested declarations. Then there's also the topic still relating to the battery regulation and its delegated act, a better and standardized definition of black mass. As explained, it's a complex product. And the black mass being classified as an intermediate means its treatment is still part of the recycling process, and it remains waste, not a product. This can hamper export of black mass, which is on the positive side. But the weakness in the current draft delegated act is that the delegated act only defines black mass as an intermediate. After further processing, recyclers could reclassify black mass as a product and freely export it outside the EU, bypassing restrictions. So what we would like to see is a broaden of the black mass definition to include black mass derivatives and specify that the material outputs must be suited for battery manufacturing or other net zero industry act related technologies. So this is another piece of EU legislation looking at a number of clean tech sectors. So here we want to have a stronger connection to also other existing legislation. There's also a proposal to standardize black mass as a regulatory reference that also is currently discussed at international level, mainly by BASC, the Japanese Battery Association. I think there's some value in it because it will enable also, I think, on an industry perspective, to create better and more equal market conditions when actually trading black mass or shipping black mass, or maybe also prohibiting export. The calculation of recycled content target is currently under discussion. So there will be soon a proposal coming out for it. There are some challenges as that the industry is seeing right now. We see China's dominance and access to materials, recycled material. It could then dominate the recyclable market because there's a lack really of domestic recycled content targets. So it really needs to be very, very carefully implemented to stimulate European or domestic recycling industry. Our suggested approach includes calculation rules that should minimize negative impacts by incentivizing producers and EU manufacturers to recycle waste batteries and production waste within Europe. That then would help strengthen the EU recycling infrastructure while ensuring a sustainable approach to secondary materials. Carbon footprint calculations, there are some considerations. This file is still to be published. It is the impact, the overall impact of recycling on the battery's carbon footprint is relatively small. So maybe not a major issue, but still, if the producers do not know the exact recycling process, they can use default values, which are based on industry averages. And those figures have been proven to be sometimes overly optimistic because they're mainly based on input from companies that have already made efforts to lower their carbon footprint. And the balance between cost and credits can then tip in favor of costs. So our suggestion is to make default values for primary materials more pessimistic. Includes and one of the measures is then to include primary sources with a higher than average carbon footprint. Require that for critical materials recycling, only company-specific data may be used to make it also more realistic. Leaving the battery regulation, going on to the EU list of waste, I think there is some promising development that the waste lithium-ion batteries and black mass from recycling are classified as hazardous waste. And this is in fact part of the Automotive Action Plan, which is, I think, really good news because it makes direct export on OECD countries nearly impossible, reducing leakage risk. And even if you want to export it to OECD countries, it will require prior notification and consent. So I think on this part, it is good news to actually stop the leakage of black mass from Europe. What still is missing is a guidance to confirm black mass and its derivatives to remain waste until fully refined. So the final step really needs not to be considered a purpose as the end of waste criteria, And this guidance would help member states ensure consistent classification and prevent unintended export loopholes. And this is something that we are currently still developing in discussion with the Commission as well. When it comes to hazardous waste treatment facilities in receiving countries to meet EU equivalent standards, I think there is still also some uncertainties what is actually meant by criteria for how to verify equivalent conditions. We see that clear guidelines for member states are needed here, specifically on OHS standards enforcement. This is something that could be provided from an EU level as a guidance to the EU member states, and that would also enable a more equal treatment and enforcement across EU member states as such. Now, coming on some future suggestions for something that is currently not in there is a lot of thoughts on how we actually could create a market for recycled materials based on competitive pricing and equivalent quality. One of the strengths and weaknesses in Europe that we have is a single market, which is in many times not really fully functioning as a single market. So exporting black mass or an end of life of batteries is sometimes more difficult to export it between or transport it in between Germany and France and from France to South Korea. So this is something that we really need to look at also when it comes to the upcoming Circular Economy Act in Europe. Then the second one we already talked about, the export ban on critical raw material containing waste, that this could actually be still enforced. So going a step beyond what we have seen with the classification of hazardous waste. And then some very, I think, some thought-provoking ideas on how to stimulate this market by establishing dynamic or rotating EU stocks for critical raw materials. There is a lot of efforts under the Critical Raw Material Act right now going on stockpiling exercises, and such a dynamic or rotating stock would give the OEMs the ownership of the critical raw materials while only selling the users right. So that is some new concept, maybe a little bit hypothetical or theoretical still. But also relates to the importance of the battery passport that will track the critical raw material ownership, even if the battery is sold separately. New business models with return obligations, and also the control for the OEMs post-usage. So this is just something that we put out on the table for further discussion. From the Commission side, I think what we're seeing right now, we see new agenda to regain competitiveness. It's a lot of promising steps and measures, talking really about boosting domestic production, a lot of focus on raw materials and recycling, support for recycling, in different other legislative files. So I think there's now an open ear really on how we can improve the situation for the industry in Europe. One of those examples is the battery booster that was put forward in the Strategic Automotive Action Plan, that in the chapter that was dealing with competitiveness and supply chain resilience. And there had been the decision under the Waste Framework Directive to clarify that when becoming waste, black mass shall be classified as a hazardous waste. But they're also talking about additional measures to facilitate intra-EU shipments and impose further restriction on export. So with this, I think that is my final slide. There's a lot of good momentum going on, I think, in Europe to really, there's an understanding of the importance for black mass for the establishment of a European battery battery ecosystem, I could say. And there's a lot of ongoing activities to support this by various initiatives and develop a more robust regulatory framework where it is not in place. I think we all need to push for it. And while we welcome the announcement of the Circular Economy Act by 2026 that will address a lot of those issues, we have showed in our white paper that there's a lot of low-hanging fruits that we can tackle already. So it's right now a lot about improvement and implementation of existing legislation. And with this, I would like to thank you. I think, unfortunately, we will not have many times for questions and interactions, also because I need to disconnect and run down to my taxi. But my email address is here. So if there's any questions or suggestions for improvement, I'm happy to provide you with this and as well as with our white paper on black mass or any other documentation that we would need or are interested in. Thank you very much. And I will disconnect now. Thank you. Bye-bye.